Next topic in personal finance is going to be credit. As we look at credit, we're going to look at it from a couple different angles. We're going to look at the basics of credit. We're going to look at something we call plastic cards, and then we're going to look at bankruptcy, along with going back to Excel, looking at our payment function, and looking at something called an amortization schedule. Starting out, when you think of credit, you probably think of banks, and you think of banks as being the person that you go get credit from or borrow money from. So you look at what is the point and purpose of a bank and how do banks make money. Banks start out in the business of renting money. So they will collect deposits from customers either in savings or checking accounts, and they'll turn around and borrow that money out in the form of car loans, personal loans, mortgages, home equity lines of credit, things like that. The gap or the difference between those two, if you're getting, 0.5% on your savings account and you're getting charged 6 or 7% on your car loan, the difference between those two is where banks make their money. Part of that is to run the bank, operating costs, things of that, buying of FDIC insurance, possibly putting some money aside in the Federal Reserve for required reserves. That's more of an economic idea that we'll get to when you take economics. But that's what banks do. Okay, they're in the business of judging how likely are you to pay back your loan and what kind of a risk are you to the customer's money, the depositor's money. They make a judgment call on whether you should or shouldn't get a loan, and in turn, they'll expect you to borrow a larger chunk of cash, pay it back over time with interest, and that's how banks make their money. 70 to 85% of the money that banks make is on interest. It's often called the spread. That's the difference between your savings account payout and what they're charging you on your loan. The other 15 to 30%, depending on the type and the size of bank, comes from fees, whether that would be checking account fees, loan origination fees, over-the-limit fees, or non-sufficient funds, or things of that nature. So the biggest piece of where banks make their money is the interest they charge between loans and what they have to give out in savings accounts. As we look at some of the basics of credit, we'll start out with something we call closed-end credit. This is a one-time loan for a specific amount of money. When you think of a mortgage, when you think of a car loan, that's more of a closed-end credit idea. You get one chunk of money, $150,000 to buy a home. You go borrow $10,000 to buy a car. It's a one-time, here's your money. Now you're going to pay us back, and more often than not, if not almost all the time, it's in what's called an installment loan, meaning we're going to have a set schedule of payments, and we've done this with the payment function, where you're going to borrow $10,000 to buy a car. You're going to pay that back over the next 5 years or 60 months, okay? Or you're going to borrow a couple $100,000 to buy a home, and you're going to spread that out over a mortgage payment over either 15 years or 30 years. But the installment loan is the same payment, adjusted a little bit for taxes and things of that nature. But for the most part, it's the same payment over the set life of the loan. Most of those installment or closed-end credit loans are also going to be secured loans, meaning you're going to put something up of value that you will forfeit if you don't pay on that loan. So if Mr. Clem goes and gets a new vehicle and he borrows, $15,000 to get a new truck or a used truck, the truck itself is collateral, meaning it is what I'm willing to give up or have to give up if I stop making payments on it. It's not really my truck until I have paid off all the loan. Once I've made that last payment, then officially I get what's called a lien. I'll get that piece of paper that says, here, we, the bank, no longer own your truck, even though you're the one driving it every day, cleaning it, not cleaning it, gassing it up, fixing it, all that. it's really now yours because you've made all the payments. Same thing with your mortgage. Whether it be 15 years, whether it be 30 years, until you've made every single one of those installment payments, that really, your house is really owned by the bank. The other end of that is what we're going to call open-end credit. This is more of a revolving line of credit where you can borrow some, pay it back, borrow some more, pay it back. The perfect example of that is a credit card. A credit card is a pre-approved loan from a company that says, we believe, according to lots of things, we'll get to in a little bit, we believe that we'll let you borrow $2,000 of our money, $5,000 of our money. You can spend it on pretty much whatever you want. Borrow it, pay it back. As soon as you start borrowing some of our money, we're going to start charging you. When you pay it back, we'll charge you interest for that, but eventually you'll have to pay that all off. There's not necessarily a set schedule like an installment loan where it's equal payments of a certain amount over a certain period of time. It has a little bit more flexibility. Most of those credit cards, best example, are called unsecured loan, meaning there's nothing that you're pledging, nothing that you're willing to forfeit as collateral or a safety net if you don't make that payment. Mr. Clem grabs his credit card and goes out and buys a new set of golf clubs for $1,500, $2,000, whatever they are. They're pretty expensive. They're not going to take those away from me if I don't pay on the credit card. Where if I went and bought the vehicle, there is something of value to take away from me if I don't make those payments. So the difference between secured and unsecured, you're either giving up something or willing to give up something in case you don't make your payments. That's a secured loan versus unsecured, where you're not pledging anything. Open-end credit, you can borrow, pay back, borrow, pay back, borrow, pay back, versus closed-end credit, one time, here's your chunk of money, this is what you get, go buy what you're looking for. Your open-end credit and your unsecured loans are going to charge you much higher interest rates. When we start looking at how those interest rates are calculated or figured out, it comes down to what we often call the C's of credit. Now, depending on who you listen to, there might be 3, there might be 4, there might be 5 C's of credit, but logically they all start with C. First one is character. And character from a financial standpoint of how trustworthy are you, how likely are you to repay your loan. That is represented numerically in what is called your credit score, and that is your past history of being able to borrow somebody else's money, pay that money back over time, and that's how we quantify that in that credit score. The second C of credit is called capacity, and this is comparing your income to your expenses, very similar to your budget. And the idea is, can you afford to borrow more money? Maybe you already have a mortgage or a student loan or a car loan out there and you're looking to go borrow more money for something different. They're going to look and see, can you actually afford to borrow our money? That's the capacity part. The 42% rule we'll touch on in just a little bit. Your third C of credit, I call either capital or collateral. It's looking at your net worth. And again, this is more your personal balance sheet or your net worth statement. Assets compared to your total debt. Do you have things of value that people could take away from you? Do you have something that you could pledge and say, hey, if something goes sideways, I could put this up, I could sell this asset and help pay off the debts. So when you talk about your 3 C's of credit, we're looking at character. How likely are you to repay your loan? And that's represented by your credit score. Capacity, comparing your income to your expenses, and we'll talk about the 42% rule in a minute, and then capital or collateral, that's more your net worth statement. Our 42% rule is comparing your gross income, and that's your income before taxes, to your current list of debt payments, things like your mortgage or your rent, your vehicle loan, your student loan, your credit card loan. If your current amount of expenses are at or above 42% of your gross income, you are probably unlikely to get a new loan. If your new loan plus all of your existing loans comes to less than 42%, you're probably more likely to get that loan. The idea being the other 58% is going for things like food and groceries, electric bill, cable, cell phone, car insurance, things like that. They kind of have that number built in. And again, every bank is a little different. Some are 40%, some are 41%, some are 42%. But ballpark, they're going to look at your mortgage, your car loan, your student loan, your credit card debt. What are your monthly obligations compared to your gross income? And if you've already spent or have 42% of your income going to those big loans, then it's unlikely that you would get that new loan. When we start looking at our next number, our 30% rule, this is your revolving lines of credit. This is more your credit card idea or your home equity line of credit. This should be no more than 30% of your available credit. And if it's under that 30% number, that's considered good. If you're using more than 30% of your available credit on those revolving lines of credit, again, credit card, that's going to pull your credit score down. When we take a look at that, we're talking, Mr. Clem has a $10,000 limit on his credit card. If he's spending or charging or has an existing balance, his goal is to keep that existing balance to under $3,000 in that example. If I need to borrow more, I should maybe borrow it on a different credit card or work with my credit card company to try and increase my available credit to the amount they're willing to borrow me at any one point in time. When we start looking at our credit score, that's the C, the character C of credit. We're going to have 3 different companies that are going to pull your information. One is called Equifax, the second is Experian, and third is TransUnion. These are the companies that track your ability and willingness to pay back your debt at any one given point in time. They're going to record the positives and the negative information, but the negative information is going to show up more often. This is how well do you pay your cell phone bill on time? How do you pay your rent or mortgage on time? Do you have debt collections or things of that nature? These people will track those financial transactions if they get reported because you struggle to make your payments. There's a company called Fair Isaac that's going to take those bits of information from these 3 different companies, and Fair Isaac is going to calculate what's called a FICO score. That's a number from 0 to 850. Most scores are in the 500 to 800 range. The higher the number, the better. The higher the number, the better history you've had paying your obligations. Fair Isaac's going to take those 3 bits of information, plug it on an algorithm, and crunch out a number. Numbers that I've seen and heard, if you're in the upper 800s, 820, 830, that is outstanding credit. If you're in the 500s, that's extremely poor credit. Most people, when they first get credit, probably going to be in that low 600 range because you haven't used credit in the past. As you look at what is going to make up that credit score, how does Mr. Clem show up with a 785 credit score or a 625 credit score? 35% of that score is determined by my payment history. How well have I paid back my debts in the past? 30% of that is on the amount that I owe. How much credit am I borrowing? 15% is length of credit history. How long have I been borrowing money and how well have I been, proving that I can pay that back? The type of credit is 10%. And your revolving line of credit actually scores better than your big installment loans because your installment loans, you borrow at one time, the money's out and gone, and now you just got to pay it back. Where the revolving line is you have the choice to borrow and pay back. Your ability to do so shows up better. And your last is 10% depending on what is your newest type of credit.